Hi, my name is Elizabeth Alvarez-Bingham. I'm an election attorney, immigration attorney, and civil litigator. I work at Guest and Gray, which is a law firm that's out of the Metroplex. I'm going to go ahead and cover with you some immigration myths. Contact me here at my email if you have any questions or anything you want to go over with me. To start with, my personal position is that immigrants strengthen America and that they're good for us. But I want to make sure that I'm clear before I continue that my particular part of this panel was supposed to be to cover some myths in the immigration system and some things that immigrants have to deal with. That is not my whole position. So I want to make sure that no one takes what I say out of context. For example, when we start talking about how much taxes immigrants pay or whether or not they contribute positively to our society, I don't want anyone to think that as a Christian that my metric is, well, I want to see how much taxes they pay before I decide if I think they should stay here or not. That's not my position, but because I want to make sure that that's clear. Given the nature of the pre-recorded panel, I just wanted to take a minute and say that. So the first immigration myth that I think we need to talk about is whether or not most immigrants are illegal. And the reason I think we need to talk about this is, again, for context, I'm not suggesting that whether or not an immigrant is legal or illegal is the issue that matters the most, or how we should decide if they're valuable or not, or if they should be allowed to stay. It's just that the way the news cycle portrays immigration while trying to construct a narrative for you to make decisions based on immigration policy, they often tend to focus on this idea that we have an illegal immigration problem that's out of control because most immigrants who come here are illegal. And I want to make sure that we know that that's not true. In 2014, for example, there were 43 million foreign-born people living in the U.S., and 44% of them were naturalized U.S. citizens. Now, 27% of those individuals, of the total 43 million, are or were green card holders or other lawful immigrants, and only 25 to 27% of immigrants currently present in the U.S. are out of status. Out of status is what we usually call it's the professional term or the technical term for individuals who don't have an immigration status. Either they had one and it expired, or they no longer have one, or they never did. But we don't really say in immigration law, you're illegal. We might say that you entered without inspection, or that you're EWI, which is what the abbreviation for that is, or we might say that you are out of status. So I just wanted to make sure that we all know at the very beginning that most immigrants that are in the United States are here legally, and a quarter or less of those individuals are currently out of status. And that doesn't mean that all immigrants who are out of status entered illegally, though, which I think is the important second myth that we need to cover. And the idea that we see when we look at the news and we hear about the fact that we need a wall and that we have border surges and illegal immigrants crossing, it's trying to paint a picture for you. I think the term I hear a lot, especially on more propaganda-oriented news, or news that's attempting to get you to focus on a particular type of immigration, is that they are invading, or that there's an invasion, that we're being overwhelmed at the border. The reality of it is, while 25 to 27% of immigrants who are currently in the United States are out of status, or what you might call illegal, almost 70%, about around 67% of those individuals came in on a visa. It means they didn't sneak in. They're what we call a visa overstay. They had a temporary visa, a school visa, visitor visa. Maybe they had another kind of visa, but most of them are temporary visa holders. But in any event, these individuals didn't sneak in. They came in, they had a visa, they were screened, they walked through Customs and Border Patrol, had their passports stamped, and lawfully entered the United States, and then chose, for whatever reason, to remain after their visa expired. In the past 10 years, in fact, visa overstays have outnumbered border crossings. 2 to 1 when you're talking about illegal immigration. And I think the reason that that's important to think about is when you're looking at a broader picture, you have, at one point at 43 million in 2014 and now closer to 44 million individuals who are foreign born living in the United States. And 2/3 of those individuals are legal and or lawful or in status. And of the 25% of the total immigrant population who are not in status, almost 70% of those individuals came in with a visa. In other words, the number of people who are sneaking in the border in an attempt to evade or elude the United States government and threaten our national security, even if you assume that all of them have that intent, which I don't think is accurate, you're still looking at a very small number or percentage of the total number of immigrants that we have. And I think it's important to keep those numbers in our head when we start thinking about immigration policy and how we should feel about immigration as Christians. One of the biggest myths that I hear is that immigrants don't contribute, so we don't really owe them anything. Now, again, I want to make sure we're clear that my position isn't that someone's contribution makes them more or less worthy of, a free life or a happy life or a life free from persecution, but just to make sure we're all clear, the idea that they don't contribute at all is untrue. I want to talk about Texas as an example. Obviously, everyone watching this won't be from Texas, but I just want to use that as an example. In 2006, the Texas comptroller said that at that time, undocumented immigrants were a net positive to our economy. Over 2.1% of economic activity, which is $17.7 billion, is as a result of the contribution of immigrants. Now, they've paid $2.9 billion in taxes. And when you look at the net loss for education and healthcare expenses and compare that to the $17 billion in economic activity we get as a result of their participation, it's clear that they are a net gain to our economy. And this includes unlawful immigrants and immigrants without visas or who entered without inspection. Those numbers, although they've all gone up together, haven't changed since 2006. That's just the first time that people started noticing the comptroller making an obvious indication in their report that immigrants were a plus positive. Now, recently in 2018, Dreamers paid they paid $2,032,100,000 in federal taxes and $1,126,000,000 in state taxes. And that's, of course, including property taxes and sales taxes. And they have a spending power of $9,412,400,000. Now, the Institute of Taxation Economic Policy, they also say that Dreamers pay $1.7 billion in state and local taxes. So I think the numbers, whichever individual person or source you want to look at, are pretty clear on the issue that immigrants, whether legal or unlawful, such as Dreamers, contribute in a plus positive manner to our economy. And so a lot of the times people use that as an argument to say that we shouldn't discuss or think about what we should provide in terms of kindness or opportunities or asylum or visas or immigration status because they are a net drain. And I want to make sure we understand that that's not true. Now, when we're talking about Dreamers, a lot of you may or may not know what Dreamers are. And something I hear a lot for these individuals is that we're just giving them free shots that other people don't get and that it's not fair. Well, I want to make sure we all know the kind of person we're talking about. A dreamer is a term that we started using about 20 years ago. It describes a particular subset of immigrants who are unlawful or without status. But in particular, these are minors that immigrated to the United States with their parents when they were babies, very small children. They've spent their entire life here in the United States. They consider themselves immigrants. They don't know in many cases that they're not American until the time comes to get a driver's license or apply for financial aid for college, or until their parents are the subject of an immigration enforcement action. Many times, until that moment, they don't know that they're not American citizens. We first started attempting to provide them with some form of status in 2001, and this was a bipartisan Senate bill, the DREAM Act, that was to provide this particular class of undocumented immigrants with a pathway to legalization and citizenship so long as they met certain criteria. Now, that didn't pass, but the original purpose of the legislation was to promise that these individuals, if they are enrolled in or have graduated from college or another institution of higher learning, had been physically present in the United States for a certain number of years, usually the number's 10, and they are at least of a certain age, 16, 18, 21. The numbers are a little muted, or I'm offering you a variation of ages here because since 2001, various members of Congress in the Senate and the House have tried to pass similar legislation, and the numbers have changed each time. It's mostly to ensure that if the person is this age now, that they came to the United States as a child, and so it wasn't their choice to come here, but that they've grown up here the entire time. They've got good moral character, no criminal record, and no other immigration law violations. Now, our best estimate is that there are 800,000 of these individuals here in the United States, and there have been at least 21 attempts since 2001 to pass a DREAM Act in some form, but none of them have ever succeeded. And so the reality is we have almost 1 million individuals in the United States who came here as children, who were to the best of their knowledge, American citizens who never knew that they weren't. And they all graduated high school, have no criminal history, are in college or have already graduated from college or graduate school, and they have no access to any other type of visa. There is no line for them to get into. So these individuals, we often hear people say, well, you should do it the legal way. And so why would we offer you something when you could have done it the legal way? There isn't a way for them. Once you've been living here for a certain number of years with unlawful presence, you can't receive a green card here, first of all. So even if they were eligible for a green card, which they're not, that's what makes them dreamers. But if they were, they would have to go back, they would have to receive a waiver of their unlawful presence before it could be totally granted. So they currently don't have an avenue for legal status, even though they've been here their entire lives. And the more complicated problem is that their parents don't have access to a lawful manner either. Right now, basically the only way that you can get in the United States with a visa is if you have a lot of money and want to be a specific kind of accredited investor. If you drop $1 million in a particular avenue or area, we'll give you a visa. If you are an alien of extraordinary ability, so you think you're chemists, scientists, models, actors, etc., right? And then you've got some visas that are available to, nurses and certain kinds of accountants, and there are certain types of jobs that you might be able to get a visa for if your company can afford a labor certificate, and to go through the long and arduous process of getting that approved beforehand. You could try the visa lottery, but ultimately, we have a family migration system that prioritizes a relationship already existing with a U.S. citizen or green card holder. So unless you're married to a U.S. citizen or are married to a U.S. citizen or are their son or daughter but are not married, or maybe a brother or sister of a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, there isn't really a visa for you. So most people who just want a chance at a better life, they don't qualify for the type of work visa that an accountant from India that's necessary because the clientele speaks a specific language and they need his assistance. Or maybe you're a scientist, or a microbiologist from Australia, maybe you're a model, maybe you play for the Celtics. Unless you're one of those people, you don't really have a shot. So we have these 1 million people that we have tried for 20 years and 21 different times to find them a way to legally be present here, and none of them have passed. And so since they haven't passed, most of these people, unless they have DACA, which we'll talk about in a minute, they don't have access to work permits or ID or the ability to get a social security number or apply for financial aid, and they live constantly under the threat or fear of immigration enforcement, even though they've lived here their entire lives. And then what happens if they want to get married or they want to go on with their life? They just don't have an avenue to participate in society the same way we all do. They're basically second-class citizens. Now, we tried again in 2019 to offer a pathway to citizenship for these individuals and for those who were on deferred enforced departure, or TPS, and the Dreamers, and that was 2.5 million immigrants, and that didn't pass either. So I don't think that we're really asking for a lot when we're talking about offering compassion to these individuals. If you think about what it would be like to live in a universe where you've lived here your whole life and didn't know you were an American, found out that you weren't, and then found out that there was no way you would ever be one. And not just that you couldn't be an American or citizen, but you can't even get a temporary visa or a work permit. Now let's talk about deferred adjudication and DACA. I hear a lot that we're just letting criminals go, but we're not. Immigration enforcement isn't like when you enforce regular law. If we run out of prison space, we just build more prisons. We have lots of prisons, and we don't really seem to have a problem putting people in prison. We get more judges, we hire more DAs, but in immigration, there's a limited resource pool. So as the number of Dreamers have increased, their apprehension started taxing the immigration system. Usually when you get picked up by immigration detention, they have a finite number of detention facilities and cells available at those facilities. And so they have to start making evaluations whether or not the individual is a threat to the community. And when an alien is detained, the U.S. Attorney has prosecutorial discretion to release them with or without charges, or to press charges. But you could agree to deferred adjudication. Now, that doesn't actually mean you're not going to be punished, or that you didn't do anything wrong, or that we're not saying that you broke immigration law. We're just saying that right now we're not going to prosecute you because we either don't think you deserve it, or because we don't have the resources to deal with you now. So we will defer the adjudication of your removal to a later time, because whenever you are talking about processing someone through an immigration detention system, it's time consuming and complicated. And if we don't have enough people to pick you up, and people to process you, and cells to keep you in, and a judge to see you, we're not necessarily going to bother. And that also comes into play when you consider that there are statutory requirements for how long we can keep somebody in an immigration detention system. So if you've got certain people which are mandatory removals, drug traffickers and people with violent domestic violence and gun runners and gang members, and we've got a whole list of people that are mandatory removals. Those people we don't ever want to let out of immigration detention because they are dangerous, right? And so if we have a limited amount of time for judges, and we have a limited number of judges. There aren't infinite immigration courts. There's only a handful in Texas, and by a handful I mean like 5. So all the different immigration cases in the state are getting routed to these places. People in Oklahoma have to come to Dallas for their immigration hearings. So we don't have as many courts as we do with other types of courts. So if you have these individuals who are a danger and they're taking up all the cells, and if we don't get them a hearing soon, we have to let them out. We know they're going to get deported anyway because they're mandatory removals. So we need to have their hearings first. We just keep bumping people down the line. And that gets more and more complicated, especially when you're talking about individuals who really want to see a judge for their asylum application or some other form of affirmative relief, but can't even get a hearing for 2 years. And while they're waiting for their hearing, you know, they have to wear an ankle monitor, and they have to report to a probation officer, which is really costly. And they're not entitled to free lawyers. And most of the time they don't get to work because they're not lawful between the time they apply and the time they get their status application granted. So most of these people are just living in a limbo forever. So with DACA, we offer you something called a deferred adjudication, where we say, look, you report to your probation officer, you do X, Y, and Z, and I'm not going to prosecute you. And as immigration removal court dates were getting to be 3 years out, and we were running out of room to detain people and space to keep them in, you know, we started deciding that we were going to offer this adjudication to people on an individual basis. And what DACA does is DACA offers this type of adjudication relief en masse. And so it tells people that we're going to allow you, you know, to apply ahead of time, so so that you can get approval ahead of time, that we're not going to deport you, right? And so that's basically what DACA is. DACA is us saying, look, we couldn't get anything for Dreamers Past, but every time we picked you up, we're not going to keep you. So what we're going to do instead is allow you to apply now for this particular type of relief. And now the downside to this, of course, is that it's not really it's not an immigration benefit, right? So you're not entitled to anything, any kind of permanent status. It's just a temporary promise that we're not going to pick you up one day while you're waiting for your parents to come home from work and take you to jail and deport you. We offer you a temporary work permit, which you can get renewed. It's a direct trade-off between prosecuting and detaining this non-threatening, you know, college student without a record, and having room in detention centers for people who are dangerous. Now, of course, the problem with this is that when the DACA program happened, people were very upset that the immigration system doesn't allow for President Obama to executive order, through the use of executive order, to create a new immigration benefit. Now, it's my personal opinion that it probably was unconstitutional to create a category of alien visas for Dreamers. The problem, of course, being that when left to, now this doesn't justify an unconstitutional action, but I think in terms for us as Christians, when we're deciding how we should feel and how we should discuss this with other people, we need to keep in mind that for us, it's not enough to simply say, well, Obama shouldn't have done that. If, when given the opportunity, Congress hasn't done anything about it for 21 years. So you know that we've got, you know, almost 2 million at this point, TPS and DED and Dreamers, who don't have access to visa programs. And we keep demanding that they get in the line and apply through the line, but we haven't offered them a line. And so we're continuing to insist that that we should just go around in circles. I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. If you are an immigrant and you are part of the 2 million that has been here and is waiting and has asked for your turn, and you're not being provided a turn by Congress to get in line, to be constantly told that you are failing in some capacity to get to do everything you can for yourself to take care of your legal status when we refuse to provide you a line is a little disingenuous. And I think that's what makes it really difficult for immigrants to continue to cooperate. In the meantime, they don't have driver's licenses, social securities, they can't drive, they can't apply for aid, you can't hardly do anything. They live in the shadows as second-class citizens, and it gets really difficult. With the use of DACA, we've been able to provide these individuals, many of them students, with the opportunity to participate in society as first-class citizens. Now, one of the first things that Trump did when he got into office was to try to shutter DACA. In 2017, they stopped accepting application. Federal district court judges told him he wasn't permitted to do so. The DC Circuit Court has upheld the ruling. In 2019, SCOTUS denied cert, and they started the process over again, and he was denied again here in 2020. So we're just going around in circles for now. It's not really a permanent solution, and I think that's something we need to think about. The final thing, I think, the final myth we need to cover, and I know I have very little time left, is that we are pro-legal immigration and we treat individuals who need our help fairly. Um, Temporary protected status is a type of visa for people who are attempting to come to America to escape a particular type of threat. It's kind of like asylum, but we do it en masse when a situation arises. For example, if a hurricane were to wipe out Haiti, or civil war were to, overwhelm Angola, or if we have another genocide in a country similar to Rwanda, we can designate them TPS and give them all a protected status. But there's an expiration on that status, and unless once the date approaches, the administration currently in power can allow those statuses to expire, and those individuals all have to return home or can extend the status. Trump's administration has continued to terminate DPS designations. So we now have several at-risk populations who came here the legal way because they were suffering from very severe and very clear situations of extreme hardship. There's often a discussion that individuals who are coming here from Latin America, or maybe the unaccompanied minors, that they're just suffering from regular poverty and violence, and so they shouldn't get asylum. We shouldn't think about it. We shouldn't consider them. Well, we could always give them TPS designation if it were important to us to offer them a better chance. We could invest more in their home countries or assist them with stabilizing their home situations. But all of that pales in comparison to telling individuals who are victims and trying to escape the Sudanese genocide or the violence and oppression subsequent to the hurricane in Nicaragua that they have to go home, or the El Salvadorian citizens who are here on TPS that they have to go home. So you're talking 1,048 from Sudan, 5,305 from Nicaragua, and 262,526 people from El Salvador. All of these statuses were allowed to expire, and these individuals were all told that even though they had been here lawfully for several years, had contributed positively to our society, that they had to go home. We told the individuals who had TPS from Haiti, 58,000 of them, that they needed to leave, that 14,000 citizens of Nepal who'd come here to escape the earthquake and civil unrest had to leave, and 86,000 people from Honduras had to leave. We've also temporarily extended but did not designate 9,000 individuals from Syria, Yemen, Somalia. We are taking the position that these individuals who came here the legal way, who suffered a hardship, and for whom we have offered sanctuary, that we no longer want them. That even the Guatemalans who came here under the volcano, which we know in 2018, where we normally would have offered TPS protection for those 1.75 million people, we were told we wouldn't be offering them either. Now, these individuals, if we send them home, we lose $3 billion in employer costs and $967 million in turnover costs. There's 60,000 plus mortgages that these individuals hold that would be defaulted. And then, of course, there's foreign countries that would be assimilating, repatriating populations en masse. And these individuals exist in opposition to the current administration of the nations that they'd be going back to. So when you think about it like that, it becomes clear that we're not saying that we're not really following through on our promises. We promise people that we're for legal immigration, but we send those people back. We promise people that if we give them away, they should follow it, but we won't give them away. And we tell people that we're happy to have them here if they've actually suffered real hardship, but then we send them back. And then we tell them that, as long as you contribute positively to society, we'll keep you, or that we have to get rid of certain immigrants because they're dragging down our economy. But it's clear that these individuals who are here legally, it will cost us billions of dollars and have economic impacts from various employing industries to mortgages, all kinds of economic impact economic impact from sending them back. So that's obviously not the real motivation. So now we've got a small glimpse about what it's like to be an immigrant in the United States. Most of you are legal, but you're all treated as if you are not. Most people who are illegal came here legally and their visas expired or they were canceled and they don't want to go back to where they're from and they have no other avenue to petition the US government. So we're building walls to stop people who aren't going to be stopped by a wall because most of them process through Customs and Border Patrol. We shut down all the legal avenues for visas, and we refuse to provide immigration opportunities or a chance to get in line to the 1 to 2 million individuals who live their whole lives here and believe themselves to be Americans, even though they are in college or have graduated from there and have no criminal record and pose no danger or risk to us whatsoever. We object when presidents take it into their own hands to address the situation, but have no problem watching Congress kick the can down the road for 20 plus years. And then, of course, you've got the individuals we brought here from actually troubled places that we tell, it's time for you to go back because we don't really want you here. And we have a host of reasons for that, right? They're draining our economy. They're dangerous. They didn't come here legally, but none of that's true. These people suffered genocide, civil war, volcanoes, hurricanes, massive civil oppression. We granted them a place here, and we're willing to take an almost $3.5 billion economic hit just so that we don't have to have them here. And that doesn't even address, I have a typo. That doesn't even talk about what happens if you want asylum. We used to, the law requires us to process asylum claims at the border. And what we've done is, I've got two typos. We've published a new rule in the Federal Register in 2019 to bar asylum claims from almost every single immigrant from any country by saying that if you have passed through another country to get to our border, then we won't have to accept your application. We used to have something called the Safe Third Country Policy, and that policy was that if you pass through a particular country that we designated safe, like Canada or Britain or Germany, then yes, you had to apply for asylum there first before we would hear your application. But by saying that you have to apply every single country you pass through, we're essentially telling people from Nicaragua or Venezuela that they can't come here until Mexico's rejected their application, which is insane. Now, this policy was halted by the district court in DC this past June, but that's just the beginning. We've shut down legal and education services for migrant kids in custody. We've tried to turn health and human services into law enforcement. We now are using what were temporary processing overflow facilities, the cages. We're now using them as permanent detention facilities for children separated from their parents. We're leaving children in vans overnight outside. Many of these people have asylum applications that are lawful. These individuals are lawful. They lawfully presented themselves at the border to request asylum. Even if they get their asylum applications approved, the government is deporting those who win, telling them that they have to go back to the country that a judge just found was dangerous to them personally. They should go back and wait there until the appeals process is over. We are refusing to process individuals' asylum claim. We refuse to process children, turn them over to Health and Human Services. And in June of 2020, we proposed a new regulation that would allow Border Patrol to deem an asylum request frivolous and get rid of it without a hearing, so they couldn't even see a judge. If you have ever let your visa expire or you've been here for a very long time at all, even if you have a legal way to apply for a immigration status, you have to get a waiver, and the rejection rate for those are so high it's basically impossible. We are closing down H-1Bs. We've temporarily banned green card issuance for many people. As I talked about before, there aren't really any visa categories for most people. So in conclusion, you're looking at a society that treats all immigrants as if they are a danger to us when they're overwhelmingly not. We talk to them as if talk to them and about them as if they're horrible, dangerous, lazy criminals that are here to hurt us, but they're not. And we treat them as if we've offered them every opportunity in the world to have a fair shake and shot at a legal status here, but it's simply not true. So much so that our current foreign policy and immigration policy prioritizes kicking immigrants, lawful immigrants, out of the country, regardless of the billions of dollars that it might cost us. And so I think that those are some of the most important immigration myths that people don't know about and that we all should think about when talking about how to deal with immigration policy. Here in the US. And as Christians, again, I don't want anyone to hear me say that whether or not somebody's legal or lawful, or whether or not they contribute, or none of those things affect how I think Christ said we should treat people. I don't recall scripture saying that we should treat the alien as the citizen so long as they pay taxes, or that we should rescue the poor, the slaves, the widow, and the orphan so long as they're American, or so long as they ask Canada first, or none of those things are part of the process for deciding how I feel about immigration policy for me personally. So I don't want anybody to hear me say that, but I just wanted to address some of the things we hear most often when talking with people, both inside, unfortunately, and outside the church, who like to hear and repeat things that are not only harmful, but are just simply untrue. So if I can help you in any other way, or you have some more questions, or there's something else I can do for you, please don't hesitate to let me know and reach out and email me here.